Good afternoon, everyone. Hi. I know it's 4 p.m. in the afternoon, and we're going to be talking about race, as we do every day in South Africa. Welcome. Thank you for coming. We are very excited to be having this conversation with these three amazing authors, writers, thinkers, and I will introduce them very shortly. I'm Nadia, and I want to just ask if this light is actually quite bright, the blue one. I want to ask if what we can do is do 45 minutes talking here, and we leave the last 15 minutes, maybe 20 minutes, perhaps let's see how things go here, for questions, comments, thoughts, ideas. We want you in conversation with us, okay? So let's have that as a plan, a mini plan. So I'm going to be reading from here just to give you some indication of our guests. I want to introduce you to Thandiwe Ntshinga, the author of Black Racist Bitch. She is a writer, researcher at UJ's University of Johannesburg Center for the Study of Race, Gender and Class, and poultry farmer. Her MA is in social anthropology, and she has been involved in critical whiteness studies, research, writing for 10 years. I mean, this is quite a thing. You need to get the book.
Yeah.
Lots going on here, as you can see. I've been very busy. Our next writer is Pieter Odendaal, and Pieter is the author, the writer of this lovely second collection called Ontaard. Those are just my notes. I've been very busy. Pieter is a poet, playwright, translator, and editor. His debut collection, Asof Geen Berge ooit hier gewoon het nie, published by Tafelberg, received the 2019 Ingrid Jonker Prize. Congratulations, big deal. His poems have appeared in various local and international journals, and he has performed throughout South Africa, in the Netherlands, Nigeria, England, Peru, and Ecuador. He was the executive director of Ntshinga Poetry, that's how I met Pieter, from 2015 to 2019. He's done a lot of stuff. So we'll just move to the bottom. His play, Droomwerk, received the 2021 ATKV Woordfeertjie for Best New Drama Script and made its debut at the National Arts Festival in 2023. Very busy person.
Very cool.
Thank you, Pieter.
Thank you.
Our third guest is Lynsey Ebony Chutel. And this book is called Colored, How Classification Became Culture. She is the co-author along with Tessa Dooms, who isn't with us today.
She's somewhere in the audience.
Oh!
Yep. There she is.
Hi, Tessa. You should have been here. Another day, okay. Well, Tessa, the co-author, is here. And this is a collection of essays written by both of them around the theme of how colored identities, as they have been and are classified, had become culture. But they'll talk about, Lynsey will talk about the book a little bit later. So Lynsey Ebony Chutel is a journalist and writer. She is a reporter for the New York Times and has worked for South African and international news outlets, along with stints in script writing for an international Emmy-nominated news satire show. It's exciting. Yes. She holds a master's degree in journalism from Columbia University and a master's degree in international relations from the University of the Witwatersrand. Welcome.
Thank you.
Okay, so these are serious things.
Yeah.
We're dealing with serious, very serious topics. And I believe that we need to have a sense of humor when we deal with these topics or we're not going to be able to cope. But we need a little bit of seriousness too, right? So we're going to deal with the serious parts and we're going to also try to have a sense of humor. These three, I want to call them narratives, texts, are written through very different forms. And they engage questions of subjecthood, identities, and generally being in the world. What is it like to move through the world in these bodies? Thandiwe's book on how social media reveals South Africa's unfinished work on race centralizes the study of whiteness as pivotal in any understanding of race and racism. We don't study whiteness, we can't fully understand race and how racism continues to matter, not only in South Africa, but globally. Tessa Dooms and Lynsey's book, Colored, that's the title, claims colored identity as a cultural one, in many ways conversing with black racist bitch. But they haven't read each other's books yet. So clearly they will be doing that after they leave. Pieter Odendaal's form is poetry in Ontard. Is it okay to translate and say Ontard means degenerate?
Yes, but it also means like literally to de-earth, like ontaard. Yes. Yes.
Okay. So the poetry speaks in very nuanced ways alongside and even to these grand theories that you will read in the books in the other two books, about race and racism, class, gender comes up a lot. So about intersectional identities. The poetry, even though it's a different form, speaks to these grand theories in very interesting ways. And we'll talk about that a little bit later. I'm going to read from Black Racist Bitch. I like saying the title. I'm going to repeat it many times. Black Racist Bitch. And I know that's why you called it Black Racist Bitch. Page 32. And that's where we're going to start this conversation. The title of this book is taken from one of my early TikTok videos where I was referred to as a black racist bitch. Or to quote the cowardly commentator at user 1558189788904, and so are you, definitely a black racist bitch, for being a critical whiteness scholar. Such an oxymoronic phrase propelled with so much ignorant conviction. Me, a bitch? Maybe. I would say the answer to that would be dependent on who is being asked, but as I will explain, being a racist is that type of oppression that can only be applicable to white people. I slowly began introducing critical whiteness studies as legitimate academic field of inquiry. Black racist bitch was just the beginning of a slew of racist as well as misogynistic, what is known as misogynoir when applied to black women, responses I received in reaction to my anti-racism teachings. I use white institutions, racial justice suppressors and upholders of white supremacist ideologies, social media platforms, TikTok, Facebook, Twitter, and YouTube as my field sites and the users that comment on these platforms as the subjects of analysis. Thandiwe, why whiteness?
I come from the social sciences. I did my undergrad in international studies, and then I did my honors and master's in social anthropology. So now in that, the master narrative is always to focus on the other. It's the white researcher, the colonial gaze, where it's the white researcher looking at the black research subject. Even then, that colonial gaze still extends when black people also look, it's called autobiography, or autoethnography, where you look at your own people, which is cool, but who funds that, right? I don't get funded because I look at white people. So my whole thing was that make white people the subject of analysis for once. I'm tired of being othered, let me other you. So I started my research with poor white people, poor whites. So I just feel like it's necessary. And in terms of racism, the conversation on racism is stagnant because you want to talk about racism, but only look at it at the margins. Why are we not looking at the center? Whiteness is at the center of all like oppressive systems. It is intersectional in that way. So that was why I went for whiteness.
Took a while. And are you still studying whiteness?
I am. For 7 years, I looked at poor whites, which then also was Africana identity, which is interesting. I feel like Afrikanerdom is incredibly interesting. However, the last time I did field work amongst poor whites in Pretoria, I was told, don't ask too many questions, otherwise. So I was like, okay, shop. I'm not doing that anymore. So I started looking at white liberals. Also, when it comes to the fragility of whiteness, it is kind of easy to look at poor whites. So I was just like, let's look at who's not looked at. And it's more difficult, actually. The documentation, like Afrikanerdom has been theorized, you'll find the history, it's there. When I was trying to look at English whiteness for this book, it was so difficult. So there is that insidious nature of English whiteness that I've been wanting to explore. Also, these are the white people I'm around, right? As a black person, as a black person of a middle class standing, these are the white liberals that you share space with, So I found it important. I found it a new challenge for myself as well to look. When I started with critical whiteness studies, I wasn't interested in middle-class white people, but right now, I am.
Because there's a lot of power in that space.
Yeah, exactly.
And so Thandiwe makes a point, you make a point, Thandiwe makes a point about, and of course my ears just went, they peaked because I keep saying this, and I was telling you this earlier, and I have had these conversations with others. But Thandiwe says she studied at Stellenbosch University, and we know there's a lot going on at Stellenbosch University. She then studied at UCT, and then she went to Wits. When you say something about Wits being, it was very hard. But what I wanted to ask you now was about how there's often a defense of UCT at the hands of previously, still Afrikaans universities like Stellenbosch. There's often this, and that's for me a further way in which white liberalness gets protected. Because there's the idea that loud racism must mean there's a lot of shit going down at Stellenbosch. And there is. I'm at Stellenbosch. I know there's a lot of shit going down. But I've also been to those other spaces like Thandiwe, and often what's not spoken about is how liberal whiteness works. Tell us about that.
So I love Afrikaners. I prefer them. My home in South Africa is Pretoria. So I grew up around Afrikaners. So to go to Stellenbosch, and that's the thing, it's even research within critical whiteness studies, you'll see on TikTok being like, oh, racial studies will tell you stuff that black people have been talking about since forever. The preference for the conservative because they're straight up about it, as opposed to this like hiding, being cool. That's something I've been trying to articulate as well, is that there is this narcissistic element within the racial entitlement of whiteness. However, with English whiteness, because of this proximity and because of this lie of thinking that you've done some type of work, it's an emotionally abusive relationship. We are caught between a rock and a hard place where you're forced to interact with these people and share space with these people, and also believe that you're forging real interpersonal relationships when fundamentally the mandate is to protect whiteness, protect white superiority. And that's a personal thing for me as well, because I have been in interracial relationships. I've been in these queer interracial relationships where, it's supposed, no, there's none of that. Like, it's all exactly the same. So my experience at Stellenbosch was, there's the racism at Stellenbosch that no one can deny. However, intellectually, they can engage in critical whiteness studies in a way that UCT refuses to.
Absolutely. I agree.
Yeah.
I'm in total agreement. She said it. Thank you. We're going to come back to that, especially the linkage with what social media allows and disallows around this work that you're doing. But we're going to move over to Lynsey very quickly. And I'm going to read from Coloured, How Classification Became Coloured, became Culture. How Classification Became Culture. Excuse me. And this is in the foreword, so the first page of the foreword towards the end. Colour does not miss a single... No, that's not where I want to start. I want to start right at the beginning and then move to that bit at the end. One of the foremost sentiments that colours my childhood memories can be encapsulated by the word wrong. My first education as a racialized person taught me that I was wrong in a world that balanced itself on the tightrope of absolute differences. For better or worse, being a full something was always better than being a half nothing. Inadequacy became a way to define my existence. For being coloured, for being a waterslumps, for being queer, never quite right and never quite enough. It's very beautifully written. Colour does not miss a single opportunity to remind us of an important truth. White supremacy lied to us all, and none of us has escaped its conditioning. But we can reclaim our histories. When we say we are coloured, we are not bound to a reductive definition of the positionality as a colonial invention created for the purpose of lubricating the apartheid state's terror machine. We are coloured because of a specific wounding and historical trajectory that birthed circumstances necessitating survival. Out of that need to survive, we created cultures that don't enjoy uniformity, but most certainly overlap with the histories of other racialized people in South Africa. So, when I picked up this book, I thought, overt claim to coloredness, clear. Very clear that this is how we are going to define ourselves and how we're going to move forward. Now, a lot of these conversations are happening at universities. I found that at Stellenbosch, for example, there's a claiming of this identity by younger generations that I was quite amazed by. I was amazed and taken aback and unsettled and still don't know what to do with it. And so this book is quite clear. It's clearer than the other books I've read that also deal with colored identities, in that there's no apology here.
No.
And we are not going to we are going to make this claim and we're going to explain why and then we're going to move on. That's what I picked up in the book. So this overt claim, why is it important?
I think the claim itself, Tess and I had a shared experience in when we left the country and we used the word coloured in the US. And we had people, Tess had a room go completely silent. I had my roommates at Columbia go, oh my God. And particularly when Nathaniel Julius was killed in El Dorado Park, and the Black Lives Matter hashtag was all over the world. But then in South Africa, I had to take it on this entirely different thing where it said Coloured Lives Matter. And so I am on the phone with my editor in New York trying to explain to her why on earth there are 9 million people in the country who still want to be called by this name that is seen as a slur elsewhere. And what we want to do is, when we're reclaiming the word coloured, what we want to do is not to whitewash it, not to clean it. We want you to understand that it comes from a point of pain. It comes from a sense of abandonment. There's a real sense of social orphanhood when it comes to being colored, when you have an identity, and Jamil put it so beautifully in the foreword, that is prefaced on the idea or predicated on the idea that you are not enough. You are not enough of this thing, and you are not enough of that thing. And so what we're saying is that in that space of being not enough, what we did as a people is that we created through resilience, through innovation, and through just pure survival, we created an identity of our own. And to be completely honest with you, I dread talking about being colored in Cape Town. Fucking dread it. And for the simple, I'm so sorry for the kids in the room. So, for the simple reason that there's a sense of how the word is used and how the identity is claimed down here that while the history is deeply, it's in the city in itself, it's also an extremely exclusionary way of looking at what it means to be colored. And so we were particularly deliberate about the idea that when we talk about being colored, we talked about being colored from all the way from the Cape, all the way up to Limpopo. Because what we want you to understand is that this is not a racial identity. It is not because your great-great-grandfather was German, and so therefore you will cling to that little specimen of white DNA still left in you, and therefore that makes you better than the person across the road, because that's the thing about being colored and being black at the same time. Whether it is I'll use the example of Johannesburg, Noordgesig is opposite Orlando. So Soweto is opposite a colored neighborhood. And even here I've seen it where you've got people pointing across the road, colored people pointing across the road and say, well, at least we are not like the black people across the road.
Right.
And so what we wanted to do is, in that, so what we're saying is that colored people, there's a rejection from outside, but there's a rejection from within. And what we want to do is, when we use that word, we want all of the word, all of its ugliness, all of its pain, but also the sweetness of a cook sister to be part of it. And so that's why we make no apology, because when we were talking to people, and we were very deliberate in how we did this, because, Tess is a sociologist, I'm a journalist, we talk to people all the time. And what we did was, we spoke to ordinary people. And in those ordinary people's stories, they would tell stories of complete heartbreak, of abandonment, of being taken away from your family because your father was Indian and your mother is Zulu, and the social worker was beginning to notice that your hair was a little too curly. And so there's a story of a woman who is taken away from her family and put into an orphanage. And it's said so matter-of-factly. And there's a way in which we say colored in such a matter-of-fact way, but what it does is that it belies a deep sense of pain. So we're not apologizing for the pain, and we're not apologizing. We're not going to do, we're not going to dance and just shuck and jive about what we call ourselves. What we want to do is move past that and say why we call ourselves that. It's no longer what are you, but who are you? What makes you who you are?
Thank you.
Are you?
So, why is it important for colored people to claim the term? You're going there. Why not call yourself black?
We do. So I identify as ethnically colored. And I want people to see it as an ethnic identity. But I am politically black. My politics are black because my politics are informed by a shared experience of blackness, not only in South Africa, but a global experience of blackness. There is a history there of white supremacy that has forced us to call ourselves black. People only started calling themselves black in opposition to white supremacy. Otherwise, we would have all just been who we are. And so because of that response to white supremacy, we all have that shared experience of living under the oppression of white supremacy. And in that sense, I am black. When I talk about myself, I refer to myself as, particularly in a workspace, so when I'm walking through Joburg, or when I'm sitting at a table and I am once again the only black woman in the room, I am a black woman. In that sense. But when I am with my family, when I am talking about culture, but when I'm also talking about the particular unique experiences of disenfranchisement in my community, then I do say I understand what it means to be colored in Johannesburg, colored in South Africa. And sometimes, that experience is also very similar to the black experience in the United States, the UK, and so I walk those two lines, and I don't think that I have to choose, quite frankly.
Okay, yes. I think that we're going to talk, there's questions about that, I'm sure. I have questions. Am I the only one with questions? Okay, if you have questions, just hold on to your questions, because we're going to move over to Pieter. And I want Pieter to start by reading a poem from the collection.
I know I said I was going to read another poem, but then...
You changed your mind. All good.
I remembered this poem. And I think that, yes, that this is the one that I'd like to read. So the history of the poem is that I Googled my name, as one does, and then found this horrific story of a farm worker, a farm owner, called Pieter Odendaal, who was accused of manslaughter of one of his farm workers. And yes, it just kind of kept on haunting me. And so I felt I had to respond in some way. So yes, okay. And the poem is in Afrikaans. There are some English bits, but also just, it does come with a trigger warning that it is also quite violent. Teen Pieter Odendaal, vir Pieter Odendaal. In die lente van my 11de jaar, draai Pieter Odendaal John Rampuru se enkels om middernag aan sy bakkie vas met die draad wat hy bedags moet span. Odendaal is dronk en op medikasie, 'n boer nes ons gemeene voorouer. Hy kan nie die gebeure ophaal nie, meen die regter in staalkoue Afrikaans. Die Rampuroes vang woorde waar hulle kan met die oogiesdraad van hulle verstaan. Al wat hulle wil hê is om John se glimlag huis toe te bring. Polisie dra die hof in Hakkiestraat toe. Mense toi in die pad waar John se bloedspoor daar lank bly lê. The back of his head was a pulp. The buttocks had been worn away by the dragging along the asphalt. The lower legs of his overalls were the only thing left on his body. Pieter het hom R800 'n maand betaal. Couldn't speak to us like a human being, vertel John se broer. He always made noise when talking, always made noise when talking. Odendaal kry 10 jaar, 3 daarvan opgeskort na hy John 5 kilometer ver aan sy voete deur die strate van Sasolburg gevuil het. Want Pieter kan nie onthou nie. Hy kan nie onthou nie. In my matriekjaar vergeet John se bene van sy vleis. Pieter snork, 'n haalgeweer langs sy bed, droom van al die draad wat hy oor die land gaan span. Hoor my mooi Odendaal, ek skryf jou af, ek ken jou nie op straat nie, ek was my naam skoon, skrop tot my rug angeliere bloei.
It's beautiful. Thank you. So, poetry as a form allows us to speak to and with alongside other kinds of theories about embodying identities, right? But poetry also allows for a different kind of creativity that maybe more other kinds of humanities or social sciences don't allow for. When I opened the collection, and I used Google Translate, I did tell Pieter there was the assumption that I could speak Afrikaans, which is a strange thing. I can, but I can't write it and speak it like that. So it's complex Afrikaans, and the nuances, you don't get it if you don't know the language. And this kind of collection, the different kinds of stories alongside each other, for me, it's very powerful in terms of how it speaks about your place as a South African. I'm not sure how you identify yourself in terms of, if you identify yourself culturally, racially. I think I know how you identify in terms of gender. from what I've read, but I'm not quite clear on the other things. But for me, what's important is what emerges from the poetry is the story of a life, and then how it speaks to both your books. Because when we try to understand race or gender or sexuality or all of them simultaneously, then we often get stuck in the theories are large, right? And there's a whole lot of theory that came before that allows you to build new theory. And then suddenly what pops up is a story, someone's story that looks back at their history. And it's a history that also is not apologetic, but there's something else there. It's you saying something about, this is how I have been positioned and how I am positioning myself. Can you talk about that a little bit? Am I making any sense?
Yes.
Also, you can just add stuff if I'm not making sense. Or...
No, it's just a lot.
Sorry, okay.
No, it's not you, it's
no,
us.
No, it is a lot.
It's
just
the
answer
place.
what you want. It's, yeah.
I think how would want to respond to that is the reason why I choose to write in Afrikaans and to write about these things in Afrikaans. The thing is that I think there's a big need, or I sense a need amongst white people generally, and I think you also speak to that in your research, to like maybe also investigate themselves more, right, and interrogate also themselves, because we also were and are still, I guess, indoctrinated by various ideas about what race means, about whiteness means, and also what was kind of fed to us historically about where whiteness comes from and what whiteness is. And a lot of that was accompanied by a lot of erasure as well, and a lot of silencing. And so for me personally, a lot of the journey has been to revisit my own family's history in this country, to dig up all kinds of things that have been erased and that I found out later were actively erased about my ancestry in this country. So I guess it's about, on the one hand, questioning that sense of racial purity, which seems to be central to the idea of whiteness, by looking at the archival records. And then secondly, yes, a decision to write in Afrikaans about these things, because I think there is a need for that kind of self-reflection. And I also wholly reject this idea, which is very comfortable and very easy for younger white people to take on, like, yes, well, we were born after apartheid, or we were born on the cusp, it's got nothing to do with us, can we just move on and forget about it and sing Kumbaya and the Rainbow Nation, all these things. But, there is obviously that for me is the sense that history is not something that is linear, it's not something that moves from one phase to the next with some kind of clean cut. It was part of the illusion, I think, of 1994 and the TRC and things that were so easily forgiven and moving along where so many people are still sitting with such deep wounds, and some people don't even know the wounds that they are sitting with. So the bottom line of what I'm trying to say is, I think there is, as a white person, and yes, I think it's irresponsible for me not to identify as a white person, also because that is how I'm interpolated when I enter a space. So to go and speak against that, I think is something that's irresponsible. But yes, okay, I'm babbling now. So
No,
I'm just
you're
gonna...
not. No, you're doing it. Please don't.
I don't know what else I want to say, just that I think what poetry has done for me is provided me a space where I can express those personal narratives and those personal struggles without falling into generalizations or saying, well, this is how it is for everyone, or this is how it is must be for you, but really just try and understand what it is that I'm feeling, and also just for my own sanity to process this troubled history that I come from and that I form a part of.
I love it. No, I love it. I love it. I love it. Like, it's critical whiteness without, like, it's Afrikaner critical whiteness. Yeah.
You want to?
No, I just like, I'm kind of even, for the first time, kind of like, I wish I read Afrikaans. But yeah, I think it's very interesting stuff, and I feel like you're coming without that, like, I'm doing a better job. It lacks that English empty liberalism.
Yes. No, we get it.
Yeah.
No, please. Can everybody hear her, though? Can we get a mic here, please?
She'll stand up.
Not to say a lot, guys, but it makes sense. As somebody who had to study Afrikaans as a second language, I had no other option of Xhosa because I was in an
Yes.
area that didn't have Xhosa teachers.
Yes.
But for him to say what he's saying, the way he's saying it, and for me to be able to, hi everyone, for me to be able, is it even on?
No.
Okay, let me find what that I can. Am I projecting though? Yeah. Thank you. You make so much sense. You make so much sense. So I was enjoying hearing you explain yourself even further, because this is how we heal when in conversation about who we are and not fighting each other physically.
Thank you. Thank you. We keep coming back to the whiteness stuff. Naturally.
Yeah. It's been at the center for so long.
It's the center.
Yeah.
Outside of that center, there are differences in the ways in which people are embodying blackness. It's it's a contentious issue, this whole colored identity, black identity stuff. You bring it up a little bit, not a lot. You bring it up in your book.
This was the first time I ever looked at colored identity. I'd actually intentionally not looked at it. Again, because my thing is critical whiteness. So I'm like, I am looking at white people. So for the first time I did look at colored identity, and as much as I kept it, I thought it was even going to be like a young paragraph, but like the more you get into it, you pull like a string and the whole thing is unraveling, and I offended people and got blocked, and so, but it's fascinating. I was just like, colored identity is so fascinating. So even the way you speak about it, I'm just like, okay, because also my experience, Gauteng coloredness is not the same as Western Cape coloredness.
Why I dread this space. Because if you walk through, so coloredness, so much of being colored is based on your phenotype, what you look like. So if you are like me, grew up dark-skinned with crus hair, you were not what we call the lucky coloreds. And so when people like me move through here with the sense of I'm here, I am confident, I am speaking for myself and for people who look like me, I am an embarrassment to colored people who are closer to white, who are able to pass for white, who are further and further away from being black. Because in a colored community, the further you are from black, the more you had social and economic gains. And it is quite clear, particularly in this province. And that's why it's such a difficult space for me. Because here, I find colored people, other colored people asking me, but are you sure you're colored? And then what I want to say is, I am the grandmother that you are denying. That's what I look like. The grandmother whose photo is not up on the wall, but the Afrikaans man who abandoned her 10 generations ago, his photo is up there, and he is remembered. but the black people who made colored identity, and it's even in the way we talk about slavery, right? Because when we talk about who was enslaved, it often leans on a history of enslavement from Indonesia, it leans on a history from enslavement from Madagascar, but then we forget also Madagascar in itself is a particularly deeply ethnically diverse country, and there are people who look like me who are Malagasy, and so that son and then becomes Malgas, and we know that history. But then there were also people who were enslaved in Angola, on the west coast, which is now Ghana and Nigeria. There were people who were enslaved in Mozambique. Where are they? Where are their stories? And when we went digging for those, and I went and I found a film by UCT students who did a story about Dina Delgoa, who was an enslaved woman from Mozambique who tried to escape and she was pregnant and she was hung. And her story is, or hanged is the correct term, and her story is not prioritized in the same way. And I would dare to say it is because she was a black woman, because colored people very rarely want to, the proximity to blackness, and understandably so, right? Because it defined where you lived, it defined what kind of work you had, whether you were going to be a tea girl, or whether you were going to be the clerk in the office, whether you were going to get the factory job. All you had to be was light-skinned and blue-eyed, and you were going to be okay. And so that idea of what it means to be colored and for people like me who move through the world and still call ourselves colored, even though I am not the picture of the exoticized biracial child, but I am still here. And I demand that you look at my history and the space that women who look like me have taken up. Yeah. Thanks.
How does that sit alongside the current black identity politics of the day?
I mean, I can talk about kind of like what spaces I occupy as a black woman. I also know this thing of kind of like being within but not within type thing. You have class, you have also my background. I mean, fuck you in the way I speak. People are, girl. Yeah. So I do struggle even then with belonging in South Africa also. And my time outside of South Africa has always been a South African representative, but then at home that gets questioned all the time. So yeah, I'm very much South African, I know this. Both my parents are closer from the Eastern Cape, like what else can I be? But people at home don't see that. So yeah, just kind of like, and then also this idea that like class will negate your race, right? There's no way I'm anything but black, but it's like my blackness is called into question. And then I think even looking at whiteness, when I started critical whiteness studies, it was still called whiteness studies, right? Yeah. So the idea, I mean, my dad's first thing was like, Thandiwe, you can't be a white apologist. I'm just like, that's not what this thing is. And then even in Wits, Wits has this kind of like radicalism and whatnot, but because I don't form, I do not conform to this idea of blackness that has to be poor, that has to be kind of struggling materialistically. You also have people who actually went to the type of schools that I went to who suddenly changed their accents to be all like, yo, comrade. And you're just like, that's not how you speak every day. But that's the type of acceptable blackness to make you pro-black. So, yeah, I actually really understand what you're saying of kind of like in spaces, yeah, of like being othered within your own space and how you have to make your own space amongst your own people.
Yeah. Lynsey? Did you want to?
Yeah, I was just thinking, no, I picked because when you're talking about Wits, because I went to Wits, but I also went to UJ the year it became the Rand Afrikaans University. So I understood every word of Pieter's poem. I speak Afrikaans, but not as beautifully as you do. I have a very flat Joburg accent. And what was so interesting about the difference between how race was dealt with at Wits versus at Rand Afrikaans University as it became the University of Johannesburg, is that Rao couldn't run away from it. Rao had to face it because, first of all, Rao is built like a lager. So you can't run away from the architectures there, that brutalist architectures there constantly. And then also, I remember we were doing philosophy, and we did the philosophy of Black economic empowerment. And here is my Afrikaans philosophy lecturer who fought at the border, who now has to confront a group of students, and we're talking about what it means for Black economic empowerment for him and for us, because with the inevitability that one of us is going to replace him at some point. And this was not the conversation that was happening at Wits, because Wits felt that because it had sort of ticked its radical boxes to an extent, because Black people who went to Wits in the 80s and 90s have an interesting experience of Wits. There we go, right? It was not the same. And so Wits ticked its boxes, but it didn't have to do the work. And it's the same thing where you were talking about where English white South Africans don't have to do the work that Afrikaners have been forced to do. And so I was just thinking about how interesting that is and how those, but then I wonder why has that work happened here in the Western Cape in the same way? Or that's I'm just fascinated.
I don't think any work happens in the
No.
Western Cape.
No work
That was a
here.
lot easier.
Pieter. I'm thinking about Ontaard being so much more than only. You're also talking about different other stuff that's going on for you, but always within space. So it's not just, for me, a poetry collection that speaks about the self without the self being part of a larger community, whether that community is South Africa or a queer community or the community of your mother's womb. I thought Tweeling was very beautiful. Can you tell us a little bit about that poem?
Well,
Yes, thank you.
I think generally a lot of what was happening in the book when I was writing is about kind of recuperating, reclaiming lost memories, things about my childhood and spaces that I was scared to go back to because growing up as a queer person in the Afrikaner community also puts you kind of on the periphery, right? And I think it does come with its advantages, even though you don't always see it as that as you're going through it, but I think it does give you a different kind of perspective on things because you are on the outside. But part of that was also just going back to this story that my mom always told me that, you know, you were part of twins in the womb and your twin died and, you know, well, you survived. And the poem, I guess, was a kind of ode to this unborn twin and to everything they never got to experience. And that sense of like carrying this person with you that never was, and what that absence means. Yeah.
It's beautiful. It's a beautiful poem. You have to buy all the books because you won't really understand what we were talking about today if you don't read the books for yourself. I know you have to make decisions, not a good time of the month, etc. But you know, it's worth getting these books. We're going to open up for questions now. So there is a mic. We'll take one question at a time. Yes.
This is for Pieter. That question, hello, it's me, June. Yeah, hello.
Hi, June.
That whole thing about trying to not be white as irresponsible. Because I also feel that my politics and my beliefs might be one thing, but what I look like when I walk into a room and the assumptions that people will make, it's not about me making myself feel comfortable. And I was just curious on why you choose that term irresponsibility, and if you can elaborate on that, of why it's important to claim and at the same time not claim the identity of whiteness.
Thank you.
Well, I think it's irresponsible because it's easy to do it and convince yourself that now you have done it, and it's also it's because it comes from a place of privilege that you can, feel that you can just discard it. That whiteness is somehow something invisible, like that invisibility cloak or something, you can just take it off, or I don't know if that's really a good analogy, but anyway, the bottom line is I think there's that illusion that you can disassociate yourself from your whiteness if you just give enough to charity and you do enough on Mandela Day, and stuff like that. I think also that, and maybe in a way it responds to the first comment and what the woman was sharing, what it is that she's experiencing. Yes, we all have to deal with a lot of the complexities of what we've inherited and what people project onto us every day in different ways, right? But how do we respond to it, and what do we do moving forward? And I think using your privilege as a white person in as much as it is possible for you, right? I mean, not in a way in which you further exacerbate oppression, but I mean, as a white person, I know I can go to another Afrikaner that is in control of a pot of money and ask them to create some kind of, multilingual translation poetry anthology, and then we can make that happen. So I think those there are clever ways in which you can use your privilege to counter the kind of continued cultural segregation that we have in our country. So yes.
Spoken like a poet. You can hear that.
Hello again to Pieter. We were in another session together. So I think this question is directed to you, but also is general. And it's about the violence in reclamation and thinking about my own writing of the term morphe that has traversed through all the races that we have in South Africa, well, particularly black, colored, and white races, and how this term has been mobilized through all these communities as a singular identity and understanding of this one thing. And I'm interested in how that happens in white communities, where when you hear the word morphe and the idea and the reclamation thereof, and especially when you think about what you have done with reclaiming your own identity and how your settlership happened in South Africa and the identities that came after that, how do you navigate that space of reclamation and the violence that comes with reclamation? That also includes black racist speech and how that impacts you as you walk into the space, and understanding that the work that you do is as important as, playing flippantly or playing into the ideas around being called a black racist bitch. Because the work that you do is important. And I've always lamented that white people go into black spaces, yet black people can't go into white spaces and do exactly the same work that they do to us. And it's violent, it's absolutely racist most times, and even at all times, really. To a point where anthropology has been such a vexatious study across, the board. So where I'm going with this is that how do we traverse the space and navigate the space of reclamation and understanding the violence that comes with reclamation?
Okay. Oh.
Is this not directed at me? In terms of the morphe part, okay. So I'll speak to the morphe part, you speak to the black racist speech part. Okay.
Can you also come in here?
Yes, to reclaim the word coloured, by all means. Yeah.
Well, okay.
Sorry to add, because you had mentioned that incident with the registrar of school.
Oh, yes, in the previous session, yes.
And then morphe being how it is and how it is mobilized through various
Yes.
and you had mentioned that you understand the difference between being black and poor and gay in South Africa versus being a white female. So when morphe then collapses all of
Sure.
Very briefly.
I mean, I just
we
know-
have 3 minutes left.
I just want all the Morphees to come together, really, and have a ball.
That's his answer to your question. Is that your answer? That's great.
Yeah, in short, yes. In long, I mean, it took me a long time to reclaim that word for myself. But yes, now I am a proudly Morphie, and then I'll scratch it out and then write it again, you know, and like constantly negotiate it because it still hurts, but then it's also helps, it gives you that, it helps you to take some of that power back. So it's not an unproblematic use, but then if I shout it, it feels a little better. Like, Morphie!
It does sound so good. Thank you, Pieter. Wine conversation.
Okay, so can Thandiwe and...
Yes. First, Lynsey.
Yeah, I'll get quickly with reclaim. So when we got to the point of reclaiming what it means to be colored and to reclaim that space, I think it's still a fight, right? Because how do you claim a word that was the first instance at least one of the earliest instances I found of the word colored being used for people who were not so-called native was by Cecil John Rhodes. And it was a word that meant exploitation because the coloreds were better behaved than the natives, and so you could pay them a little less on the diamond fields. And so how do you then take an identity that was built from a point of white supremacy, an identity that was built out of enslavement, an identity out of abandonment, an identity that was built on the idea of orphanhood? How do you reclaim that? You do it by exploring and excavating the history of it. And also to talk, what Tess and I did was that where I would dig into the history, she spoke to young people about what it meant for them today. And we played those two against each other. So to know where the word comes from and what it fully means, to come back to that, and then the idea of what it carries and what it conveys today. And what it conveys today is, yes, a sense of disenfranchisement, and we're seeing that with these small political parties popping up based on that not black enough, not white enough vote. And that's incredibly dangerous. And that's not what we mean when we say reclamation. What we mean when we say reclamation is to reclaim a sense of pride and a sense of identity, and to reclaim your space in the South African story, not as someone outside of South Africa, but a part of it, someone whose identity was created as this country, as this national project of South Africa was built, so were we.
Thank you. I'm going to give Thandiwe a chance to respond before you run out. I know it's 3 p.m. and I know that I haven't been... Oh, God. I thought I saw 1 in front of the 5. 5 p.m. Please don't run out. Let's give Thandiwe.
Yeah, I think mine will be really quick. So black racist bitch was hurled at me. It's a comment that I received by a white person who, was mad. So, my whole thing is like, when they go low, write a book about them, and it's fine.
Shall we end there? Please go buy the books. Only way you're going to know more about what we spoke about today. Thank you so much, everybody, and have a wonderful rest of Open Book Experience.